Good morning, everyone. This is episode number 4 of today's architecture podcast. My name is Hugo Taillandier, and I'm the host of this podcast. A podcast in which I interview people that will help you to create a better architecture, an architecture that enhances nature and serve humanity. Because I believe that the construction industry has the power to create a new world. A world where humanity and nature can flourish together. So today's episode is for everyone, from architect to architectural technologies, engineer, designer, interior designer, contractors, and even client. If you're the client, you definitely want to know how to reduce the cost of your building, bring value to your building, reduce its environmental impact, and also we are going to discuss the sense of ownership of a building. And the brilliant thing with it is that you can do it mostly by changing only the way you think, the way you approach a project. So, as usual, grab a cup of coffee or tea, some biscuits, lay back and listen. The subject of today's episode is I love it. I discovered that about a year ago, and since then I'm so excited about it. And this is circular economy. Yes, circular economy in the construction industry. And even if I love it and I can talk about it for hours, I'm not gonna do it. Today's guest is Stephen Boyle from Zero Waste Scotland. So Stephen has worked in the area of environmental regulation and management and resource efficiency for over 30 years. He qualified as a chemist in 1989 and worked for over 20 years in different positions for the Scottish environment protection bodies such as SEPA, which he left in 2008 for the world of consultancy, where he worked in various positions, primarily around climate change and energy issues. 4 years where he had the opportunity to introduce the EU ETS to the aviation sector. He was engaged in 3 programs with the Carbon Trust, introducing carbon management to the public and private organizations all over across Scotland, and to many small projects across the UK and overseas as well. And in 2012, Stephen joined Zero Waste Scotland to lead the delivery business support through the Scottish Government's Resource Efficient Scotland programme. And now Stephen is the strategic program manager of Zero Waste Scotland for almost 8 years. So that's it, we're ready. So first question, Stephen, what is Zero Waste Scotland?
So Zero Waste Scotland is a Scottish Government organisation. We're fully funded by the Scottish Government, and we're there to help and support the delivery of Scottish Government's policy in a number of different areas. Everything from litter to domestic waste to commercial waste, industrial waste, and also supporting the Energy Efficient Scotland programme. So we do a wide range of different environmental and sustainability goals. And we are primarily the Scottish Government Circular Economy Agency.
All right. And so you are the program manager for the construction department. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So I head up the construction program. Yes.
Okay. So what's your job? What are you doing like in this part of like the Zero Waste Scotland? You and your team. What's your job?
So our job is to take forward the circular economy within the construction sector.
All right.
And we have a group of professionals who work with me, not just directly, but across Zero Waste Scotland in many different disciplines, from education, procurement, research, as well as traditional construction sustainability and circular economy. And we all are there to help take forward a number of our specific goals. Some of those are about responsible production and responsible consumption. Um, we are there primarily to reduce carbon, reduce waste, and to build people's awareness of the value of materials. And that's all there to help and support Scottish Government's policy on circular economy, which is to give value to materials and help them make things last. That's the title of the policy, is Make Things Last.
Okay. So how do you like work with? Are you working with private companies or
Mhm.
do you like
Yes,
so
yes.
companies
So
are
we
calling you just like, oh, we need help on this
mm,
project. Can you help us to implement, I don't know, circular economy, reducing waste on this project? How
yes.
do you
So we
work
work
with?
with private companies and public organisations,
Okay.
all to help them support that whole responsible production and responsible consumption and angle, and promote circular economy. So yeah, so private companies from SMEs who we help and support do the basics, which is about good material handling and good material usage and waste reduction. The basics,
Hmm.
right the way up to helping private organisations develop their own products and materials, um, to help design those materials so that they can be designed to be recovered and reused multiple times, or for them to design a new product, a material that remanufactures or reuses pre-used materials.
Okay.
And there's a number of organisations and businesses that we've done that with over the last 10 years or so here in Scotland.
Hmm. So because like I'm aware that not everyone, because me as well, about a year ago I didn't know what was circular economy. That was completely new. So can you give us a definition about what is circular economy in the construction industry?
Yeah, so within the construction industry, the circular economy is about um, valuing the materials that we have and designing our buildings in such a way that we can reuse those materials, repair those materials, and make them last within that building for as long as possible. And at the end of the life of that material or product, they can be gathered, recovered, and reused, hopefully within another building or for another purpose, and keeping and retaining the value of that material or product for as long as possible before then reintroducing that material and those products back into the natural environment. And yes, that's a challenge,
Mhm.
um, but it is one that which we have to try and tackle because of you know, the we are. If you go and listen to the Scottish Environment Protection Agency and their report on the three planet living, we are using more resources than we actually have available to us from in the world's perspective. So therefore, we need to reuse our materials. And from a carbon perspective, we need to drive down the amount of materials that we use and reduce their carbon. And mainly for us within the construction team, we're talking about materials, so we're talking about embodied carbon here,
Mhm.
rather than the operational carbon, which everybody speaks about for energy efficiency reasons.
Okay, and so now you've been working for almost 8 years for Zero Waste Scotland,
I have,
and
yes.
it's been a long time. It's quite
Yes.
long, but good. Um, have you seen like the interest of private company or general public growing up into circular economy, like in this last almost a decade?
Oh, very much so. When we first started talking about the circular economy, everyone just was everyone just focused on waste
Okay.
and saying, yes, this is our waste here. Um, we kept saying the circular economy is a society where there is no such thing as waste. So therefore, I don't want to talk to you about waste. We want to talk to you about resources and how we can design a minimization program of how many of the amount of resources that you use, but let's create a plan of the resources that you do use, how you can recover them and reuse them as many times as you
Mm.
possibly can. And that whole concept was alien to people 8 years ago. But slowly over that 8 year period, we have seen the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. We've seen the circular economy grow in people's awareness, grow in people's understanding. And now it's becoming a topic which a great many professionals who spoke about sustainability and environmental protection are all now very familiar with. What I would say is that we still have a long way to go to really embed it within the construction sector, because there's a lot of professionals who don't fully understand yet what we actually mean in the sector. But it is growing, and the understanding is definitely growing. And the understanding at a policy and a government level and their strategies is now becoming more and more understood. And we're beginning to see things like Scotland's national planning framework, which talks about placemaking, and how new policies like that are now beginning to think, what are circular economy principles, and um, how can we introduce these into these national policy and strategies. So yes, it's been slow, and there's a long way
Mhm.
to go. But yeah, I have seen change over that 8 years.
So the government is on board with this idea of circular economy and starting to promoting it and putting legislation, regulation about it. Is that right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes. So government's behind it. Um, it isn't quite as straightforward of a way of thinking, and some policy issues need to be thought about a little bit more um, thoroughly in the way that they are approached. But yeah, the government are definitely behind it, especially the Scottish government. And you can say that as well for other European governments, such as the Netherlands and Denmark and the Nordic states. They've been putting in circular economy legislation and strategies for a number of years now, very much in line with what Scotland's been doing. So yes, we do definitely. We are very lucky in Scotland to have that support of government.
That's great. And
Mhm.
you said that a lot of professionals are not fully aware of what is circular economy. So what what is the barrier of it? What stopped them to use circular economy? Like if I'm a professional right now and I'm asking you, I want to do circular economy in this project,
Mhm.
what are the main challenges I will be facing?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things there. One of them is the understanding of what circular economy principles are within the build, and we can talk about that later. But one of the other ones is that you need to design circularity into a building or a retrofit or infrastructure right from the beginning. And then the people who go behind that have to understand the reasons why you are doing things slightly different from what they're doing. And there there is sometimes, not always, but sometimes a cost to doing this. And I'm afraid that we very much are on a cost-based model of buildings at the moment. And until we break that cycle, we will continue to fall short in delivering a full circular economy. We talk about value a great deal. Um, and ask people, what is it that you value in the building or infrastructure that you are building? And it's it's not just the cost of the actual brick that you use. It's what is the value of that brick to you from an environmental perspective? And what value does that brick have for you? I wish I'd chosen another material than brick. But what value does that brick have for you in the next version of that building, or in the next building that you build when you deconstruct the one that we've currently got that brick in? And therefore, it has a value at that point. And it's got an environmental value within carbon as well. So that whole principle about value is something that people we're asking people to think about. Um, And unfortunately, because of the way that our finances work and the way that we build buildings, um, that whole life cost aspect is not always taken into consideration. But we are beginning to see it coming into policies and legislation. I just read an article recently on Denmark, who are introducing some new legislation which will require all buildings less than 1,000 meters squared to have part and parcel to that new build, to require them to do whole life costing, whole life carbon costing. So that's a step change, and hopefully pointing people to really calculate what they truly value in the work that they do. Another way of asking people about value is asking them within their deliberation on the procurement of what they're asking for. Again, what is it that's important to you within the build? And ask them about cost, but also ask them things like, what are the social aspects that you will value from this building? What are the environmental aspects? What are the carbon aspects that you value? What are the health and well-being aspects? What's the biodiversity aspects? What do you think about employment, social benefits? Ask them all of these things and say to them, let's put a score against these values as being what ones are important to you. And therefore, in the final deliberation, in the final design of the build, and the final procurement, let's put out a procurement exercise which reflects what's important to you and what you value, rather than just ask them, here is a set cost and you must deliver it for that cost.
Okay, so I think I've got it. It's more focusing on the value of the building instead of just the cost of it. Okay, that's great. So now let's say I'm a SME or a big company and I want to implement circular economy into my everyday practice. I have zero experience, I don't know what it is, and I just come to you, Zero Waste Scotland, and ask you like where do I start? What's the easiest, low cost, first beginner step to take when you want to implement circular economy into your practice?
Yeah. So I think we mentioned earlier on that one of the very first introductions that we had here, that you had to the work of Zero Waste Scotland, was our 10 points on circular economy and circular principles within the built environment. So we would push people to have a look at that first. But the first thing that you do as an organisation is look at who you are and what you do. So if you are a construction firm who builds houses, or retrofits bathrooms, or a tradesperson who does that kind of work, you ask them, what is your normal practice of work? How much materials do you use, and how much materials do you waste? Is there an approach that you can take that will minimize the amount of materials you use and the amount of waste that you generate? Then you ask people, the materials that you use, um, can you use materials which have a low embodied carbon and can be naturally resourced and can be recovered at the end of their life? And in that same respects, ask them about any materials that they have that come out at the end, as if they've minimized the amount of waste that they generate. Is there any materials at the end of the work that they can recover and reuse for another purpose that they're doing? So a carpenter or a joiner, is there any wood that comes out at the end of a piece of work that you can recover and reuse for another purpose within the work that you do? Um, and then if you are an architect, then you say to the architect, can you put into practice in the building that you're designing the circular economy principles of design? So that challenges an architect and a designer right from the beginning to design out waste throughout the process, throughout the lifetime of the build, and throughout the lifetime of the in use part of a building, and also in the end of life. So you're designing out waste, designing it to be adaptable as a building. You're asking them to consider layering within the building. That means that you're challenging them to understand the lifetime of each of the different aspects of the build. If you put up a steel concrete framed building, that frame of the building and the base of it will probably last for 100, 200 years. Um, but you could put in a window frame, which might only last for 30 years. And, and behind some of the plasterboard or other walls, internal walls, you'll have cabling that's behind that, which may actually only last or have a lifetime of between 10 and 15 years. So what you don't want to do is you don't want to put that cabling, which has a lifetime of 10 to 15 years, behind a brick wall
Mm.
or behind another material which has a much larger lifetime. So you want to think about the layers so that you actually create within that design access points, accessibility to those things which have a shorter life period. So you're actually designing for maintenance, you're designing for retrofit, and you're designing for adaptability in your buildings right away to minimize the amount of materials that you have to use for that adaptability to adapt it, and reducing the amount of waste that's generated through that adaptation and maintenance throughout its life. And then at the end of life, of course, you're designing it so that you can recover all those materials. So think about mechanical fixings. You know, steel frames are terrible for embodied carbon because of the intense energy that's used in the manufacturing of steel. But put bolts onto each of those steel pillars, and therefore you can unbolt them and recover them at the end of their life so that the next building that they go and use can be used in that building, and you create a new building. And for that um, steel frame, the embodied carbon of that next steel frame will be minimal. It's just the transportation and time to build that frame again from scratch, because you don't have to melt it and put energy into restructurizing, forming it. So that's where we really challenge designers to think differently.
Okay, so it's not about like adding like new materials. No, it's not only about adding new materials that can like don't create like damaging waste to the environment, but it can be just by the way we design the building that creates circular
Yes,
economy. So it costs nothing, just a bit of time to think about it, to do things
yes.
differently. That's a,
Think about it to think differently. I mean, there was a piece of work done by the European Commission about buildings as material banks,
mhm.
and that's very much along those sort of principles of thinking about buildings differently. Let's think about them as a bank of materials which are there to be reused again within the buildings of the future.
Yeah, I like it. So like a storage, like a big storage. You got like all materials
Big
there.
storage units. Yes.
That's a lovely concept. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. And the big thing about all of that is that as we move towards net zero carbon, everyone is focused very much on net zero carbon at the moment.
Hmm.
We are decarbonising our grid electricity. We're moving all of our heat sources and lighting sources, energy sources within a building to electricity, because we're putting up all of these renewable electricity, wind generation, hydro, water electricity generation. And we're really doing well. Scotland's doing fantastically well in decarbonising our grid electricity. And we will hit net zero on that. I'm very confident. But to hit net zero and be net zero carbon within our built environment by the deadline date in Scotland, which is 2045, then any materials that we use in that new build or retrofit of a build need to be net zero too. And the only way that we're going to do that is by using natural materials like wood, which sequestrate carbon, i.e., have a negative carbon impact, or we reuse the materials from those banks, those buildings, those material banks, reuse those materials because they've got a much lower embodied carbon too.
Okay.
So that's how we reach net zero.
That's I understand how tricky it is because it's just like it's gonna change all of our habit of like, because we live actually in a society of consumerism. We buy, we use, and we throw. Like we do that with almost
Mm,
everything.
yes.
So changing it, like in the construction industry, it's gonna be, it's hard. Yeah, it's amazing to think about it,
Mm.
but I think it's a great challenge.
I mean, one of the things which we talk about is the benefits of doing it as well, and raising people's awareness of exactly how much it does cost them in the linear model that they put in place. We developed last year, and hopefully this year we'll be publishing it, a methodology for calculating and measuring the true cost of waste on a construction site. And we've done a few trials of our methodology. It works really very well. Um, one of them we did on a Glasgow building site,
Mhm.
making homes, a home site. We did a few others in different sectors, but I'll talk about this house building one. We we went into the site during the fitting out of, I think it was 8 buildings at the time, and they were doing everything from the walls to the insulation. Insulation stages were very prominent at the time when we did this survey, which took us, I think, 3 days. And at the end of it, we had an 8 yard skip. Yeah. Are
Mm,
you familiar with an 8 yard skip? Yeah, just a simple
yeah.
skip. The ones, general ones you see in in building sites across the UK and the world, to be honest. And we asked, we calculated the true cost of the materials, and we included within that the labour cost for cutting and transporting the materials to the site, and transporting them from the place of work to the skip as well in the time that the people were working there. And the skip itself cost the building site somewhere in the region of 240, £250 just to have the skip there and to
Okay.
be taken away and dealt with. And that's what people's perception was the cost of this waste. But we are really talking to them about the true cost of the waste. And it wasn't until we actually calculated it and showed the site that the true cost of the waste and the materials on that site was somewhere in the region of £2,400 rather than £250. And that's simply because of time, uh, material wastage, um, and mixed in amongst all of that material wastage is things which were being put in there because they needed maybe a 2.5 meter length of a 5.5 meter length piece of wood, so they just take the other 2 meter length and throw it in because they didn't need to use it.
Hmm.
They didn't therefore put any value in that extra piece of wood. It's only a bit of waste, throw it in the skip, but it has a value. Uh, so that behavioural change thing needs to change, but by pointing out to them the cost of that, then that will then change their approach and their view on the materials and change their values,
Okay.
how they value them. And that's it. A lot of this is about behaviour change.
Yeah, fair enough. And
Mm.
is it possible to build a new building only with refurbished materials? Have you ever tried that? Like a
Yes, no, we
project?
have. We've just well, yes, you can. There's the Waste House down in England at the moment, which was, I think, 100% built from reused materials. But and there's an example of one in Carnoustie, which is a very small 1 bedroom chalet type building. So you do have them. You can find ones that are there. But we've just completed the design of a social community venue uh, up in the east coast of Scotland. We're working with the designers up there. And it's looking at giving the target of the designer to have sustainable or reused materials of a minimum of 90% in this new community building. And one of the things which people think is a barrier is, oh, I'm going to have use tiles? Am I going to have old pieces of wood cladding my building? No, this has to look like a brand new building. So we're using remanufactured materials, um, and things which are that are brand new that people wouldn't know had recycled and sustainable products. And this is a brand new building looking fantastic. So we've got lots of wood, as you can
Yeah.
imagine, and things like plastic within the tarmac and the road surfaces and car park surfaces. We are we're using a Scottish product called the Kenetech brick, the K brick, which is made from 90% recycled construction materials, and also has about a tenth of the carbon footprint, which is fantastic. The carbon impact of doing this work is incredible. It really is. Um, and yeah, so we're doing lots of things like that, and that whole development is going to be, as I said, 90% recycled or sustainable materials. So yes, it can be done.
Okay. Yeah, because like this vision of like reusing material is just like, oh, I'm gonna use 10 different type of stone of timber cladding is not gonna look well. But no, if you just recycle it, those material, but recycling has a cost as well in terms of energy, like and carbon
Mm.
emission as well, isn't it?
No, yeah, absolutely, yeah. So you have to balance what you do. I think these are just figures off the top of my head, but the Kenetech brick, which I mentioned, is an unfired brick, which has the same strength and qualities of a standard fired brick, kiln fired brick, but it has 1/10 of the carbon impact.
Okay.
If you take plate glass and you can recover it and remake it back into floating plate glass again for our windows, that has something in the region of a sixth of the carbon
Okay.
intensity of those materials. And that's true for recovered plasterboards, recovered wood, steel. They all have a lower embodied carbon, lower carbon impact, um, just simply by recovering them and remanufacturing them in that way. So um, you have to then balance that with the use of sustainable materials which sequestrate carbon, so
Mm-hmm.
they have a negative carbon impact. So the use of wood
Yeah.
and things like this, they help a great deal with that. Um, but yeah. And if you read the UK Green Building Council's uh, reports on how we reach net zero carbon, we still have to talk a little bit about offsetting the carbon of our buildings. So I'm afraid we still have to do some of that to reach net zero
Mm-hmm.
at the moment.
At the moment, yeah, for now. But a lot of to do in terms of innovation and have
Yeah,
creative idea about the subject. So it's exciting at the
yeah,
same time. A lot of
yes.
work, but yeah. So okay, so for now we've seen that circular economy can reduce cost by reducing waste, bringing value to a building, using building as material storage. But can can circular economy bring different value than just cost reduction in a building? Like, can it bring images, good images to company or to the society or just like to people using it in a project?
Yeah, no, so there's lots of corporate social responsibility in there, and um, there, businesses and organizations need to understand their customers and their customers' values. The co-op are an excellent example of where a business is very aware of its customer base, and their customer base wants them to be environmentally and sustainably a robust organization. So the headquarters for the co-op is one of the most efficient, sustainable buildings in the UK, and that was built maybe 5, 6 years ago. Um, and the investment which is being made now by a lot of companies is that financial institutes are now investing for them. They're looking for green, sustainable, and circular investment opportunities. So even multinational and billion-pound investment portfolios are now looking for and investing and prioritizing those over other types of investment. So there is major drivers in there about all of this. But when we look at the the whole the whole circular economy and sustainability aspect is not just money, it's also the economy, um, and the social aspects of it. And when you talk about the social aspects of it, the thing about the circular economy is that you're using materials, hopefully locally sourced natural materials that can be recovered, which means a lot of the times things like plastics and bonded materials can't be used because they create VOCs. Um, and what VOCs and other products like that, man-made bonding agents, they create VOCs which create an atmosphere internal air quality issues, which have contributed to illness and people's detrimental impacts to their well-being. You see examples from 1960s, 70s housing all around the UK where there's damp in the air, dampness from spores and mildew, but also there's VOC issues from the insulation that are in those buildings and the poor breathability of those buildings, which created asthma. And there was a pandemic of asthma. Is pandemic the right word? But there was an issue, a health issue in the UK from poorly designed buildings that couldn't breathe and were creating air quality issues inside. So the elimination of VOCs through the use of natural materials, because natural materials like wood don't have those same levels of VOCs. So you have better breathing or buildings, which um, which contribute to the well-being of the individuals who live there, work there. And if you have that atmosphere in a workspace, it helps productivity. There's studies out there that show this. The productivity in a workspace is better. For schools and education establishments, better air quality and the use of wood and other natural materials within the building fabric of the building, they all contribute to well-being within the individual, which means that they actually have better concentration, better productivity, and greater potential for learning. And of course, if you help the well-being of the individual who work, live in these buildings, and play in these buildings, then there is a much better wellness in the community and a much lesser impact in the community and across the country on our hospitals, which is, and if we can reduce the amount of people who go to hospital, it greatly reduces the cost of hospitals and health to government. So you can see where the benefits are from proper design of buildings and use of natural materials. That's just another aspect of circular design
Yeah,
principles.
that makes sense. Because yeah, but that's a beautiful aspect. I mean, that's amazing. If we can heal people
Mm.
thanks to building, or at least make
Yeah.
them feel better, like
But
on everyday
it's
life,
yeah,
that can
yeah.
have a
You,
huge
you'll
impact.
see you'll see this has been put into design of buildings for a long time now. If you look at all hospitals, any new hospital that's been built in the last few years, um, many of them have wards which have at least an aspect of them which looks out into an inner court, which will have trees and plants, or externally to a wood or to a green area. And that's really all about putting the natural
Mm.
materials, natural scenery in front of a patient because that helps their recovery from the illness and helps with their well-being, and it means that they recover quicker. So, and that's the same if you use, as I said, wood and stone and other natural materials with actually in the building fabric itself. So, all contributes. Mm.
Amazing. So if you want to change the world and you are an architect, you or a construction company, you can
Yeah.
just by building better
Mhm.
buildings.
No, absolutely. Yeah, it's not just a box that we can go and sit in. It's a box that we
Yeah.
live in. So let's look at that box and make sure it's the best box that we have and can have.
Yeah, because apparently we spend 90% of our time into
Mhm.
buildings. and even more now with all of those lockdowns. So so that would make sense to design building in a way that doesn't affect our health and well-being in a bad way, doesn't make us heal, but more if we can improve our health through building, that would be great. That would be amazing.
Mm. Yeah. No, it's often not thought about um, within some of their normal builds. But there are, I mean, there's other aspects of the circular economy we've not really touched on, and different approaches as well. One of the concepts I'll mention to you now is the whole thing about servitization, and that's a different way of thinking too. Um, do you, as an owner of a factory, of an owner of an office block, do you actually need to own, for example, the lights in that building? Because you don't need lights, you need light. So why don't you buy light and not lights? So if you had a company that supplied you with light and you gave them access to your building to put in light fittings, then it would be in the interest of that company to make robust, low energy lighting that can be recovered, reused somewhere else, and maintained so that they didn't have to keep buying new ones to replace them with, had light bulbs or LEDs or other type of low energy bulbs which last longer, therefore reduces the amount of times that they have to go back into the office to change them. And as an individual within the company who owns that building and has to work within that building, you have a guaranteed light level which you don't have to worry about. And if you get below that, then you don't actually have to pay your bills. And things like that are really beginning to come into play within the circular economy. Um, that's where you have products which you value for longer, retain the value, reuse them, and because of the nature of them, you can remanufacture them into something else. And that's coming into our buildings just now. We're beginning to see, you see that all the time for things like printers and photocopiers. That's a servitization model. And that servitization model is moving from the white goods and electrical equipment within offices to actually the materials of the buildings as well. So from the lighting to even windows and doors, you're beginning to see people do that.
So if I understand, is the way we see ownership, we don't buy things, but we rent or
Yes, it's a
hire
rental
things?
model. Yes,
Is a rental,
yeah, a little
okay?
bit.
And we rent thing, and when it breaks up, you're just like, oh, call the company who you rent the product, and you're
Mm,
just like, can you replace it? And it can be like a chair, table, lights,
absolutely.
anything.
Yeah, absolutely anything. Absolutely anything. And what that does is it means that you are guaranteed a product which meets your specification 100% of the time.
Hmm.
That product will be of the best quality it can be
Yeah,
because it's within the interest of the people who supply that product to you to make sure that it is um, the best product so that they don't have to maintain it regularly and that then at the end of its life it can be recovered and reused somewhere else. So that's just another one of
yeah,
the circular economy principles that we talk about. And go that me taking you back to that 10-point guide that we mentioned right at the beginning of our
yeah.
conversation.
Okay.
So that's just yeah.
New world opening right now. That's I love it.
Yeah, I think we mentioned earlier here that um, probably could speak about this for hours, and I know that we only have an hour together. But what I'd say to yourself and to anyone listening, please go on to the Zero Waste Scotland website and have a look at our 10-point guide on the circular economy. Not just read what we've written about it, follow some of the links to the materials which we recommend and see and read a little bit more about all of the different concepts that you can introduce circular economy into within the built environment. Everything from everything from planning to procurement to manufacturing to buildings themselves to material handling and resourcing, innovation, Digitization as well. So understanding a building using, there's great opportunities within the built environment right now to introduce greater levels of digital solutions to help and support all of the different concepts that I've spoke about today, about following materials, minimizing the amount of materials used, putting the best materials in place, stopping damage within the buildings. There's things like building information models and other software that you can introduce into the way that you design and build buildings. These models are like inventories of products and materials within a building, which can live with it, not just in the design stage, the build stage, but in the management and lifetime of the building that facility managers can use or owners can use and update and upkeep throughout the life of that building. And then that then becomes a little inventory of materials and products that can be handed to someone at the end of the life of that building and say, here you go, this is the inventory of materials and valuable products in here. Take this away and maximize the value and reuse of these materials in the future homes. And that's just one aspect of digitization. There's some fantastic things being done with robots, with drones, with sensors, and some of the laser scanning that's been done on buildings at the moment, understanding progress in buildings, understanding and helping support even the changing of sandstone lintels in old tenement blocks in Glasgow. You have laser scanning happening to these frontages of buildings that measures exactly the design of these lintels that needs replaced. And brand new ones are manufactured and taken in and just slotted in simply because of the digital solutions that have been put in place to help support that, which minimise waste, minimise disruption to the house owners and to the people in the streets because it takes less time because it's been done digitally and remotely. So whether your discipline is you want to get your hands dirty or whether you want to set a computer designing software and laser technology and all of these things, there's lots of opportunities within the circular economy, within construction, which should be, hopefully other students like yourself, you've been that they can get enthused about and show that they can really make a difference. For anyone that's listening, please get involved. There is lots of opportunities and there's lots of exciting things happening. We really need to change the sector. We need to really change the way we think about the sector, and bringing in new people and new ideas and new thought processes and thinking, then that's what the sector really needs at the moment. So it needs new blood. So encourage as many new people into the sector as possible and new thinking into the sector.
That's it for today's episode, and I bet you liked it. And I bet now you are ready to start implementing circular economy into your daily practice, into your project, and share it with your friends and clients and everyone. Ooh, I'm so excited, and I'm still so excited, sorry. So what's next? Next, you can have a look at Zero Waste Scotland website, which is a brilliant website where you can find a lot of resources and tips on how to implement the circular economy and reduce waste, not only into the construction industry, but also for your daily life. So that's a brilliant website. Go have a look at it. It's amazing. Then go have a look at the 10-step guidance. There is a quick link in the show notes of this episode if you want. And in the show notes, you will find some extra resources that Stephen shared with me after the interview. And that's different organizations, different company who are working toward the same goal as Zero Waste Scotland. Also, Zero Waste Scotland has its own podcast where they give you tips and advice on how to reduce waste and implement circular economy into your everyday life. You should have a go. So for now, you have no excuses except laziness to start implementing circular economy into your daily practice. Anyway, I wish you a good one, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye bye. Love you.